Welcome back, friends. We're looking at a very brief, but necessary look at Conchita's historical context that our Lord sees fit, and she cooperates um, to help with the challenges of this time. So, despite these forces, or perhaps because of them, the church entered a paradoxical era of flourishing mysticism and missionary zeal. Pius IX would convene the First Vatican Council in 1869, defining the dogma of papal infallibility, even as the Papal States fell in 1870. His successor, Leo XIII, would emerge as the great statesman pope, issuing Rerum Novarum 1891. And that, too, my friends, comes straight out of the syllabus of errors and is still in force, and it is always good to give that another look. The encyclical that would shape Catholic social teaching amid industrial exploitation. Amid persecution in Germany, Bismarck's Cultural Kampf, 1871 to 1887, and France with the Third Republic's anti-clerical laws from the 1870s, the Church endured through divine grace manifesting in its saints. Thérèse of Lisieux, 1873 to 1897, would later offer her little way as empires crumbled. John Bosco and Damien of Molokai anchored an age drifting from God, and in the early 20th century, Pius X, as priest and later pope, would fortify the church against modernism, while Mexico's trials, intensifying in the 1920s, forged new martyrs.
Yeah, it is quite an interesting historical period, particularly, Rerum Novarum. We were able to, for our generation, really revisit that underneath the tutelage of John Paul II. As you said, is it Leo? Who comes after? So first, the Pope who loses the Papal States. That is which Pope?
The ninth.
Right. Yeah. He, after just the body of work that was given to us at that time, I think has not effectively borne its fruit because it's been somewhat hindered by the modern world's attachment to the documents that are present in Vatican II, which are beautiful documents of their own, but they sort of have, particularly the documents on modernism, and that particular heresy has really been a little bit left behind, and I think is open to really right now a need, kind of an urgent need for somebody, a scholar like John Paul II, who can come back and revisit that for us and bring it back to our attention in the same way that John Paul II did with Rerum Novarum in Sanctissimus Annus. So we can hope that maybe we might see that and have that be revisited, because that's really the consequences. We're really living concretely underneath those errors, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mexico in turmoil. So now we're coming straight into Blessed Conchita's world. For Mexico, the years from 1862 to 1937 were marked by nearly unbroken instability. Yet God was at work in the hidden hearts of its people. After Maximilian's fall, the liberal reformers of the La Reforma era reasserted a strict separation of church and state, expropriating church lands and suppressing religious orders. President Benito Juarez led the charge, expropriating church lands and curbing its influence. His successors, notably Porfirio Diaz, pursued modernization policies inspired by Europe. So see, that's why we spend a little bit of time looking at Europe, because it's coming into Mexico, but it's going throughout the world, frankly. Often at the expense of indigenous and Catholic traditions. though Diaz pragmatically tolerated private devotion to maintain social order. San Luis Potosi, where Conchita was born in 1862, had once been a center of silver wealth and colonial religious fervor. By the late 18th century, it had become both a cultural crossroads and a stronghold of conservative Catholic resistance. Churches still rang with sacred music. Processions wound through cobbled streets, and within private homes, faith quietly flourished amid the political hostility. But the dramatic trials lay ahead. The Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 1920 would devastate the country. What began as a populist uprising against the long-standing Diaz regime devolved into a brutal civil war. Peasants, bandits, generals, and ideologues fought for shifting causes, and the church, perceived as an ally of the old order, was increasingly targeted. Priests were exiled, churches desecrated, and religious instruction banned. Then came the Cristero War of 1926 to 1929, a desperate uprising of Catholics, many rural, poor, and fiercely devoted, against the anti-clerical policies of President Plutarco Elias Calles. Under his regime, public worship was outlawed, religious orders suppressed, and priests executed. In this crucible of blood and faith, the souls of Mexico shone. Viva Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King, became their battle cry and their prayer.
Yeah, it's quite a time. I don't know if you've read, Graham Greene has a very beautiful novel, right, that is written about that particular time. And you know, one can't be not be moved by the story of Blessed Miguel Pro, right, who
Right.
was the man of many costumes, right, who had to go around the countryside, really hiding his identity for fear of what eventually happened to him, which was that he was murdered, and did give that great hopeful rallying cry, as he's being executed by the state. It seems so. I think so few of us in America are not ignorant of this part of Mexican history. I just don't think that there is an awareness that there was this level of anti-Catholicism in a state or a country, as it were, which is now so recognized for its Catholic roots. The vast majority of people, I don't think, even know that the practice of the religion was publicly outlawed. I don't think that they know that there were child martyrs, martyrs from childhood all the way up to grandparenthood. I'm fairly confident. But even just recently, there was a child martyr who was recently recognized by the church. Of course, his name kind of escapes me because it's actually long. Do you remember his name? It's a
And
beautiful movie.
we'll put it in. We'll have a little title here.
It was a beautiful movie that was made maybe 10 years ago, right, about the life of the Cristeros,
Hmm.
and that particular fight against the injustices of religious persecution. And one can only imagine, as we see now, publicly going on, the desecration and the attacks that are being put forth, particularly on Christians and Catholics in Africa, how there is almost always going to be an onslaught against the faithful and those of us who live in places um, where we are free to practice our religion must take seriously our obligation to fight to defend those liberties which have been so hard gained by the many good men and women who have gone before us fighting for those rights. Because as we see in Mexico, and now as we see in Africa, those rights are not assured.
Oh no, they're not assured. And I would have to check it, but the frequency with which we are seeing churches burnt and seriously vandalized in France
Yeah,
is
right.
appalling.
Yeah, it is absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Yes, those of
And
us
and
who
and even
still,
like when you have King Charles, who theoretically is supposed to be the upholder of Christianity, you know, opening new mosques as though it's a great thing um, for England, has to be one of the greatest acts of schizophrenia for a Christian leader ever, right? There can be no doubt that there is and always will be an animosity on behalf of um, those who profess authentic Islam against Christianity. One can respect them if it is truly their belief that they are right and we're wrong. Maybe there's an element of begrudging respect there, but the reality is Christianity has enemies, and we need to be able to identify them and name them so that we're capable of competently fighting against them without prejudice. Right? I mean, it's not out of hatred that we fight an enemy. It's out of love for the truth.
right. All right, friends, let's bring up now Conchita, a hidden fire and a mystical witness in her time. Till then, fides, oratio.